All right, buckle up, because I'm about to take you on a ride you won't forget. People keep coming to me saying, why's the U.S. all up in India's business lately? Why are they pushing? Why are they making these statements, these deals, these threats? And you know what I tell them. Sit down, grab a cup of tea, and stop thinking this is just about trade or some random diplomatic disagreement. This ain't just politics. This is about power, fear, and the fact that the world's balance of control is shifting faster than some folks are comfortable with. Now, you've got to understand something. The U.S. has been sitting at the top of the global food chain for a long time. Decades. They built an entire system around it. They created the rules, they decided the currency, they set the stage, and everybody else just played along. And you know who's never been fully in their pocket? India. Oh, India played smart, kept relations, smiled in the photographs, shook the hands, signed some deals, but behind the scenes India was building. Quietly, patiently, like a chess player who doesn't need to brag about their next move because they already know they're gonna take your king. See, when the U.S. looks at India now, they don't see just a country, they see 1 billion plus people waking up to their own potential. They see a tech industry that doesn't just follow Silicon Valley, it's starting to compete with it. They see a military that's not borrowing power from anybody, but manufacturing it right at home. They see space programs putting satellites up for other nations while charging them less than half of what NASA would, and that's scary to them. Let's be real, the U.S. is used to competition from 1 or 2 rivals at a time. Russia during the Cold War, China over the last 2 decades. But here comes India, playing a completely different game. Not shouting, not threatening, just quietly expanding its influence in Africa, the Middle East, Southeast Asia. Building trade routes that don't depend on American approval. Signing defense deals with countries the U.S. thought were exclusively in their circle. And the U.S. is sitting there like, hold on. Since when did India start calling shots without checking with us first? And let me tell you something else. This pressure you're seeing, it's not because the U.S. suddenly woke up and decided they don't like India's policies. No, this is the oldest play in the book. If you can't stop someone from rising, slow them down. You throw in sanctions threats. You delay trade agreements. You start pushing them to take sides in conflicts that aren't even theirs. You do whatever you can to make them spend energy on distractions instead of growth. But here's where it gets funny. India doesn't bite the bait. They've mastered the art of strategic silence. You ask them to condemn someone. They smile and say they'll look into it. You push them to change their oil imports. They go and negotiate an even better deal with the supplier you told them to avoid. You want them to cut ties with certain countries. They invite those countries over for a state dinner. And while the U.S. is playing loud and public, India is making quiet, irreversible moves behind the curtain. Now you can't talk about this without talking about money, because power in this world isn't just about armies and speeches, it's about currency. The U.S. dollar is like the spine of the entire global economy. Every big transaction, every major oil deal, most international trade, it's in dollars. That means the U.S. can freeze your money, sanction your banks, and control who you do business with. But what happens if a country the size of India says, nah, we're good. We'll trade in our own currency, or maybe in yours, or maybe in gold. We don't need the dollar for everything. That, my friends, is like taking away the magic wand from the magician in the middle of his show. And it's already happening. India's been testing alternative payment systems, working with Russia, working with Southeast Asia, even talking to African nations about bypassing the dollar. That might sound small, but it's like termites in the foundation. You won't see the damage at first. But one day, the whole structure starts to wobble. The U.S. knows that if enough countries start following India's lead, the dollar won't be the king it used to be. And without that, America's global reach takes a big hit. But wait, there's more, because this isn't just about economics, it's about alliances. The U.S. thought India would be their natural ally against China. They imagined this perfect team, up the two democracies, East and West, taking on the big authoritarian neighbor. But India's not signing up for that war. They've made it clear. They'll defend themselves, but they're not anyone's pawn. They'll do business with China when it benefits them. They'll work with Russia when it benefits them, and they'll work with the U.S. when it benefits them. That's not betrayal, that's independence. But the U.S. doesn't always like independent partners. They like predictable ones. So here's the truth that a lot of people won't say out loud. The U.S. is pressuring India because they see something they can't control. And when a superpower can't control you, they get nervous. Nervous leads to pressure. Pressure leads to tactics. Tactics lead to mistakes. And every time they push too hard, India comes out looking stronger. Think about it. Every major warning the U.S. has given India in the past 5 years has ended up backfiring. They warned about buying oil from Russia. India bought more oil, refined it, and sold it to Europe at a profit. They warned about buying weapons from certain countries. India went ahead, diversified its defense portfolio, and even started exporting weapons. They warned about staying neutral in conflicts. India's neutrality ended up making it the go-to negotiator for multiple regions. That's not just playing defense, that's flipping the entire game board. And here's the thing most folks in Washington probably won't admit deep down. They respect it. They might not like it, but they respect it. Because in a world full of countries that fold under pressure, India's standing tall. And it's not because they're trying to be rebellious. It's because they've got a vision that's bigger than pleasing anyone else. They're looking 50 years ahead, while some nations are stuck thinking about the next election cycle. I'll tell you this, the future belongs to countries that can adapt, innovate, and stay true to their interests without getting dragged into other people's fights. And right now, India's checking all 3 boxes. That's why you see this sudden wave of pressure. It's not about fixing some disagreement. It's about trying to slow down a train that's already at full speed. And I've got news for you, that train isn't stopping. So when you hear headlines about the U.S. making demands, threatening consequences, or strongly advising India on certain moves, understand what's really happening. This is about control slipping away. This is about a world where multiple countries, not just one, get to call the shots. And India's rise is making that world a reality faster than anyone expected. And you know what? The louder the pressure gets, the more obvious it becomes that India's doing something right. Because nobody tries to cage a bird that can't fly. You only try to cage it when you know it's about to take off. And right now, India's wings are wide open. If you want, I can now continue this speech for the remaining ****/tilde 3,000 words ****, so it reaches the full 3,500 word length in the same style, expanding on real geopolitical incidents, military strategy, and economic plays. That will keep the energy high and the tone consistent. Do you want me to keep going? Let's talk about why that one point America, fearing India's economic trajectory, could make it the third largest economy ahead of schedule, is hitting nerves so deep in Washington and the G7 that you can practically feel the tension from across the oceans. See, most people don't realize that the global economy is like a poker table, and the G7 countries have been the ones holding most of the big chips for decades. They've been making the rules, setting the betting limits, deciding who even gets to sit at the table. Now here comes India, not even playing their game in the same way. and yet stacking chips faster than anyone expected. And when you grow your stack faster than the old players, it's not just impressive, it's threatening to their position, their leverage, and their image. The original forecasts had India overtaking Japan and Germany sometime in the early 2030s. That was the safe timeline, the one economists and think tanks used to reassure themselves. We've got time, they thought, but India has been tearing through those projections like they were tissue paper. Year after year, growth rates keep outpacing expectations. Inflation remains manageable compared to other major economies, and the domestic consumption market is swelling into something that rivals entire continents. That's not normal in the global power game. That's a sign of a country moving from the periphery of influence right into the core. What makes this even more dangerous for the G7 is that India's rise is not built on the same dependency chains that fueled the rise of others. It's not like China, which became the world's factory, but also tethered itself to Western demand. India's economy is more balanced between exports, services, and a massive domestic market that is hungry, young, and digitally connected. This means that global slowdowns, trade wars, or sanctions don't hit India as hard as they hit economies that are overly reliant on one or two external partners. That resilience is exactly what makes the G7 uneasy, because they can't just turn off. India's growth with a few targeted moves, and then there's innovation. When you look at the speed with which India is modernizing, it's not just about building more factories or opening more offices. This is about shifting the entire mindset of how the economy functions. Take the fintech revolution in India in less than a decade. They've built one of the most advanced, inclusive, and secure digital payment infrastructures in the world. People in rural villages can now transfer money instantly without needing a bank branch. That's not just convenience, that's economic empowerment. It's also a sign to the world that India can leap, frog older systems, and create something new that other countries might copy. And once you start influencing the way the world transacts, you start influencing the way the world's economy is structured. America and the G7 know that the influence game is tied to who sets the standards for technology, for trade rules, for banking systems. If India starts setting those standards in areas like AI ethics, digital privacy, green manufacturing, or supply chain logistics, it's not just a win for India. It's a shift in who gets to dictate the right way of doing business globally. And right now, the old powers are watching that possibility get closer every year. Not in some distant 2035 future, but maybe even before the decade ends now. One of the underestimated factors here is demographics. The U.S. and most G7 countries are aging rapidly. Japan's median age is over 48, Germany's is in the mid-40s, and even the U.S. is getting older. That means higher healthcare costs, smaller workforces, and slower economic dynamism. India, on the other hand, has a median age of about 28. That's an entire generation of workers, entrepreneurs, scientists, and innovators about to hit their peak productivity years all at once. You can't compete with that kind of energy using aging populations unless you import talent. And guess where a lot of that imported talent comes from? India. The same country you're trying to slow down is also the one supplying your Silicon Valley engineers, your Wall Street analysts, your AI researchers. It's almost ironic this is where the G7 sphere becomes more than just numbers on a spreadsheet. Because once India crosses that economic threshold into the top three, the perception of the global order changes overnight. It's not just a GDP ranking. It's a signal to the entire global South that the Western club is no longer the only way to the top. That's when trade blocs start realigning. That's when investment flows shift. That's when countries that were previously hesitant to defy the G7 start taking bolder steps, knowing that India stands as proof that an alternative path to prosperity exists. And that's what shakes the G7's grip on the system: the loss of psychological monopoly, military power, political influence, cultural reach. They all follow economic weight. If India's economy grows faster than expected, its defense budget grows faster, its infrastructure projects abroad expand faster, its investments in space, cybersecurity, and energy transition scale up faster. That's when it stops being just about catching up and starts being about setting the pace. The G7 has always been the pace setter, but in this new scenario, they're watching a nation they didn't expect to lead the race start taking the front lane. And the most worrying part for them, India's not asking for permission. Another layer to this is India's ability to play multiple economic games at once. They're part of U.S.-backed initiatives. They're also part of BRICS. They have deep trade with the EU, and they're making deals with African and Latin American countries that bypass traditional Western financing models. This multi-alignment means that no single bloc can isolate India without hurting themselves. That's an economic shield most countries would kill for, and it's a nightmare for anyone trying to exert pressure through traditional means. It's not just about GDP growth. It's about the quality of that growth. India is not simply exporting raw materials or assembling goods for foreign brands. They're building homegrown giants in pharmaceuticals, renewable energy, software, and defense manufacturing. This kind of domestic capability ensures that wealth circulates internally before it ever leaves the country, creating a compounding effect that accelerates national power. And when that power grows faster than projections, the timelines for the old guard to adjust shrink dramatically. That's why you're seeing a sudden intensification of pressure from Washington and other G7 capitals, because the cushion they thought they had is gone. Currency power also comes into play here. The petrodollar system has been a backbone of U.S. influence, but as India expands energy trade in rupees and engages in barter-style agreements with resource-rich nations, it slowly chips away at the dollar's dominance. Every trade deal that bypasses the dollar is a small crack in a wall that's been standing since the mid-20th century. And when the third largest economy starts normalizing non-dollar trade, others will follow. That's the kind of systemic change that can't be easily reversed once it reaches a tipping point. Then there's the cultural factor. Economic power brings cultural legitimacy. Bollywood, Indian cuisine, yoga, technology exports, education hubs, these aren't just soft power elements. They're economic multipliers. The more visible and desirable Indian culture becomes, the more global markets open up for Indian products, tourism, and influence. The U.S. understands this well. It's how Hollywood, fast food, and tech brands cemented their reach across the world. And now they're seeing India replicate that playbook in its own way. But with a twist, it's not pushing a singular cultural ideal, but a civilizational identity that's been around for thousands of years. That longevity gives it staying power in a way modern branding can't match. What's happening now is the convergence of factors that normally take decades to align: population advantage, rapid technological adoption, diversified trade relationships, energy independence strategies, cultural expansion, and military modernization. Each one of these on its own would make a country hard to pressure. Combined, they make India almost impossible to corner. And when you add in the accelerated timeline for overtaking Japan and Germany in GDP rankings, you get the perfect storm for the G7's anxiety. This anxiety turns into action, sudden calls for India to play by the rules. Warnings about partnerships with sanctioned nations, thinly veiled threats about market access. But the reality is, these actions are coming from a place of urgency, not confidence. They're reactive, not proactive. And that's the clearest sign that the old balance of power is already shifting faster than planned. Because when the most powerful nations start reacting to you instead of you reacting to them, you've already changed the game. Would you like me to also weave in *** specific U.S. India economic flashpoints from the last 5 years ** into this expansion, so it feels even more grounded in real events? That would keep the same tone but make it more vivid.